For 29 years, a single soldier waged a war that had already ended. Deep in the suffocating heat of the Philippine jungle, he lived without orders, without contact from his country, and without the knowledge that the world had moved on. While cities were rebuilt, technology advanced, and generations were born, he survived monsoon rains, gnawing hunger, and the constant, paranoid terror of an invisible enemy. He burned fields. He fired upon farmers. He slept with his rifle clutched to his chest, believing that surrender was a moral failure worse than death. This is a true story, not about heroism in the traditional sense, but about the terrifying power of belief. It is about a loyalty so deep it warped into madness, and what happens to the human mind when it is programmed to never let go. His name was Hiroo Onoda. When he finally emerged from the jungle in 1974, he was not just a survivor. He was a ghost from a vanished empire, wearing a tattered uniform that had been patched and repatched for 3 decades. He likely did not know that the Japan he was fighting for no longer existed. What he knew, with devastating clarity, was that he was a soldier, and the war was not over until his commander told him it was. In December 1944, the world was burning. Japan was losing the war. On the small island of Lubang in the Philippines, a 22-year-old intelligence officer named Hiroo Onoda was given a final set of orders. These orders would become the iron bars of his psychological prison. His commanding officer, Major Taniguchi, looked him in the eye and said, "You are absolutely forbidden to die by your own hand. It may take 3 years, it may take 5, but whatever happens, we will come back for you. Until then, so long as you have one soldier, you are to continue to lead him. One soldier, one mission, no surrender." Months later, the American forces landed. The Japanese defenses crumbled. Most soldiers were killed or captured, but Onoda, obeying his command, slipped into the dense, mountainous interior of the island. He took 3 men with him. As the sounds of battle faded and the Americans secured the island, Onoda and his small team vanished into the green hell. They believed the Japanese army would return any day. They prepared for a counterattack that would never come. The jungle is a slow, patient assassin. It is a place where nature is constantly trying to disassemble anything man-made. Leather rots in weeks. Metal rusts overnight. A simple scratch from a thorn can fester into a gangrenous wound that smells of death before the heart even stops beating. For the first few years, Onoda and his 3 companions, Akatsu, Shimada, and Kazuka, lived like hunted animals in what they called the green hell. They were constantly wet. During the rainy season, the monsoon hammered the island for months. Their uniforms, once crisp symbols of imperial authority, turned into rags. They were covered in jungle ulcers and ringworm. But Onoda was an intelligence officer. He didn't just survive. He adapted with a terrifying ingenuity. He realized that to survive, they had to maintain military discipline. If they let themselves go, the jungle would swallow their minds. They developed a nomadic routine. They never stayed in one spot for more than 3 days. They slept on slanted bamboo beds to keep off the wet ground. When their shoes rotted away, they slaughtered local cows and fashioned crude sandals from the raw hide, letting the leather harden around their feet like casts. To preserve their rifles, the Type 99 Arasakas that were their only link to their identity as soldiers, they used coconut oil. They disassembled the weapons daily, cleaning every spring and bolt with obsessive care. A jammed rifle meant death. They stole rice and bananas from local farmers. They dried meat over smokeless fires to avoid detection. They brushed their teeth with the fiber of palm trees. They were ghosts, drifting through the foliage, watching the villagers, convinced that the locals were enemy spies. But the physical struggle was nothing compared to the psychological siege. In late 1945, the first leaflets dropped. They were printed by the American military announcing Japan's surrender, Onoda picked one up. The paper was high quality. The ink was fresh. He read the words, "The war is over, come down from the mountains." To you and me, this is the truth. To Onoda, it was a trap. He analyzed the syntax. He scrutinized the phrasing. He decided that the Japanese used in the leaflet was slightly unnatural, a translation error made by an American Nisei. He told his men, "This is enemy propaganda. They are trying to trick us into coming out so they can slaughter us." Years passed. More leaflets fell. Newspapers were left in the jungle. Photos of their families were dropped from planes, pleading with them to come home. Onoda looked at a picture of his aging parents and convinced himself they were doctored eye. Mages created by American intelligence. Every attempt to save him was interpreted as an act of war. The group began to fracture under the weight of this shared delusion. In 1949, Private Akatsu, the weakest of the group, began to drift away. He would lag behind on marches. He muttered to himself. One night, he simply walked into the dark and never came back. He surrendered to the Philippine police. Onoda was terrified. He was sure Akatsu would betray their position. He moved the group deeper into the mountains, into the most inhospitable terrain, paranoid that an attack was imminent. Then the violence escalated. They weren't just hiding. They were active combatants in a war that existed only in their heads. They burned the rice piles of local farmers to deny the enemy supplies. They engaged in shootouts with local police, believing them to be allied troops in disguise. They saw farmers as collaborators and livestock as military rations. In 1954, a skirmish on the beach of Gontin turned fatal. Corporal Shimada was shot between the eyes. He died instantly. Now there were two, Onoda and Kazuka. For the next 18 years, these two men existed in a psychological feedback loop. They became twins of the jungle. They mended their uniforms with fishing line and needles made from wire. They spoke of the glory of the emperor, reinforcing each other's madness, verifying each other's reality. They celebrated New Year's every year by facing Tokyo and bowing. They played Go using stones. They reminisced about food they used to eat. They kept each other sane by being insane together. But the world outside was moving on. Jets flew overhead. Transistor radios blasted pop music from the villages below. Onoda heard it all, but he filtered it out. To him, the jets were American bombers. The radio reports of the Tokyo Olympics in 1964 were elaborate lies broadcast to trick him. Then came October 19, 1972. Onoda and Kazuka were burning rice shocks in a village called Tillich. It was a routine guerrilla action, but the local police had had enough. A shot rang out. It wasn't the suppressive fire they were used to. It was precise. Kazuka took a bullet to the chest. He fell into the mud, gasping for air. Onoda tried to drag him to safety, shouting at him to stand up to fight. But the light faded from Kazuka's eyes. Onoda was now truly alone. The silence that followed was heavier than anything he had ever known. Kazuka was his last link to humanity, his only witness to the war, the only other person on earth who shared his reality. He was 50 years old. He had been in the jungle for 27 years. And now he was the last soldier of a dead empire guarding a mountain for a ghost. In 1974, the stillness of the jungle was broken not by a soldier, but by a college dropout. Norio Suzuki was a young Japanese adventurer with long hair, a t-shirt, and a smile that seemed out of place in the wilderness. He had told his friends he was leaving Japan to find Lieutenant Onoda, a panda, and the abominable snowman in that order. He set up a lonely camp in the jungle, hung up a mosquito net, and waited. 4 days later, he felt eyes on him. Onoda emerged from the shadows like a spirit. He was holding his rifle leveled at Suzuki's chest. His finger was on the trigger. He was ready to kill. This was the collision of two worlds, the fierce, disciplined imperial soldier of the 1940s facing the relaxed, pacifist Japanese youth of the 1970s. Suzuki didn't run, he didn't fight, he bowed. He looked at the emaciated soldier and said, "Onoda-san, the emperor and the people of Japan are worried about you." Onoda lowered the gun, but his suspicion remained. They sat by the fire all night. Onoda stroked his rifle, his eyes darting into the darkness, listening for American ambushes. Suzuki talked about skyscrapers, bullet trains, and a Japan that had risen from the ashes. Onoda listened, but he shook his head. "I am a soldier," he said, his voice cracking from disuse. "I cannot leave without orders. If I leave my post, I am a deserter. My honor is all I have left." Suzuki realized that logic wouldn't work on a man whose entire reality was built on faith. Only ritual could break the spell. Suzuki returned to Japan with photos of the ghost soldier. The country went into shock. The government scrambled to find the one man Onoda would listen to, Major Yoshimi Taniguchi. But Taniguchi was no longer a major. He was an old man, stooped with age, working quietly in a bookstore. The war was a distant memory to him, but for Onoda, he put the uniform back on. On March 9, 1974, a helicopter landed in a clearing on Lubang Island. The heat was suffocating. The air was thick with the sound of cicadas. Major Taniguchi stood in the open, sweating in his heavy wool uniform, which smelled of mothballs and old age. Then a rustle in the leaves. Hiroo Onoda stepped out. He was wearing his uniform, now a patchwork quilt of stitch. Ease and repairs, but clean. His boots were polished with coconut oil. He carried his rifle at a perfect angle. He was 52 years old, yet he moved with the snap of a 20-year-old cadet. He stopped in front of the old bookseller. He slammed his heels together and saluted. The sound echoed in the clearing. "Lieutenant Onoda, reporting for duty, sir," he shouted, "awaiting orders." Taniguchi's hands shook as he unfolded the paper. He began to read the official decree. "The Imperial Command orders all military units to cease combat operations. You are relieved of all duties." The words hung in the humid air. Onoda stood frozen. His eyes widened. He looked at the major, then at the sky, then at his rifle. For 30 years, he had told himself that his suffering had a purpose, that his friends had died for a reason, that he was the vanguard of a great army that would return. Now, in a single sentence, that purpose evaporated. The war hadn't just ended, it had been over for decades. He had been killing farmers and burning rice for a ghost empire. Onoda's shoulders slumped. The iron posture collapsed. He lowered his rifle, the weapon he had cleaned every single day for 10,000 days, and let it hang by his side. It was no longer a lifeline. It was just a heavy piece of metal. He didn't cheer. He didn't smile. He began to weep. It was a guttural, animal sound, the sound of a man watching his entire life turn into dust. It wasn't relief. It was a collapse. In that moment, the structure of his entire life disintegrated. The 30 men he had killed or wounded over the years, the friends he had watched die, the youth he had sacrificed, it was all for nothing. Leaving the jungle was a violence of its own. When the helicopter lifted him out of Lubang, Onoda looked down at the canopy. For 30 years, that green ocean had been his entire universe. It was his enemy, his mother, and his prison. Now, in minutes, it was just scenery. He returned to Tokyo in March 1974. The government rolled out the red carpet. A crowd of thousands cheered him at the airport, waving the rising sun flag. They saw a hero, a living embodiment of the samurai spirit that Japan had lost. But Onoda didn't see a home. He saw a foreign planet. The Tokyo he remembered was a city of wood and paper, disciplined and stoic. The Tokyo he found was a neon nightmare of concrete and glass. The silence of the mountains was replaced by the deafening roar of traffic. The smell of wet earth was gone, choked out by exhaust fumes. He looked at the Japanese men around him, men in business suits who cared about golf and stocks. He looked at the women wearing Western fashion, laughing loudly in the streets. He felt a profound, sickly alienation. In interviews, reporters asked him what he had been thinking about for 29 years. They wanted profound wisdom. Onoda looked at them with dead eyes and said, "I was thinking about my rifle. I was thinking about how to kill the enemy. I was thinking about duty." He realized that the Japan he had sacrificed his youth for, the Japan he had killed for, had died in 1945. He was a ghost haunting a shopping mall. He couldn't breathe. The softness of modern life disgusted him. So he ran away again. In 1975, Onoda bought a one-way ticket to Brazil. He moved into the remote interior to raise cattle. He traded the jungle for the plains, seeking the brutality of nature because it was the only thing that felt honest to him. He married, he built a ranch, he tried to forget, but the world kept pulling him back. In the 1980s, hearing about the rise of violent crime among Japanese youth, he returned to Japan not as a soldier but as a teacher. He opened the Onoda Nature School. His curriculum was simple: survival. He taught children how to make fire, how to sleep in the dirt, how to endure. He wanted to inject a drop of that old iron resilience back into a generation he viewed as weak. Hiroo Onoda died in 2014 at the age of 91. His story is an uncomfortable mirror. It is easy to call him a fanatic. It is easy to judge the waste of a life spent fighting a phantom war. But Onoda is a reminder of the terrifying power of the human mind to construct its own reality. He survived because he had a purpose. He endured the unendurable because he believed he was part of something greater than himself. In a world where we often give up when the Wi-Fi is slow, Onoda's story asks a haunting question. How far would you go to keep a promise? And at what point does loyalty become a prison? If you found this story compelling, please hit the like button. It helps these documentaries reach more people. And subscribe for more deep dives into the limits of human endurance. Thanks for watching.